Our romantic attachment styles are the patterns that we have for how we interact in our relationships with others. Humans are designed to form attachments to other people. It's only human nature to desire love, comfort, and support from others. Our attachment styles can also extend to how we interact with friends and family, but in this video, I'm going to be focusing on romantic attachment styles. My name's Fairy, and I make videos on physical and mental well-being. So, what are the 4 attachment styles? There's 1 secure attachment style and 3 insecure attachment styles. So starting with the secure style, people who are securely attached are capable of sending and receiving healthy expressions of intimacy. They enjoy spending time alone and time with their partner. They have a positive view of relationships, have healthy interdependence, and to them, relationships feel like zen, peace, and harmony. So moving on to the insecure attachment styles, the first one I'll be discussing is called the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. And people who are anxiously attached tend to be more clingy and needy and can be jealous or possessive. They need frequent validation and can send constant texts to remind someone that they exist because they're worried that they're not truly loved. They can be codependent and feel like they're responsible for other people's emotions and other people are responsible for their emotions, and can tend to be a love addict. Hi, my name's Fairy and I'm a love addict.
Hi, Fairy.
On the other side of the spectrum is the dismissive avoidant attachment style. People who have this attachment style are hyper-independent. They may avoid vulnerability and may be slow to text back or make plans. They can be easily suffocated and have a fear of commitment. To them, relationships are a low priority, and they may actually think that it's an admirable quality to not want a relationship because they're only focused on their needs and not their wants. They tend to be more focused on their career, partially because money will never hurt them the way that a relationship can, but also partially because they feel like if they're ambitious, they'll get the love and recognition that deep down they long for and finally feel worthy. And then we have the fearful avoidant attachment style. And this is where someone swings back and forth between the anxious and dismissive attachment style, which is what I lean towards, so I understand all of y'all. So they have characteristics of both attachment styles, but the way that it uniquely manifests for them is they want closeness but are scared of it. So they're like, come here, go away, come here, go away. They constantly expect the worst in the relationship, and this attachment style is common in people with borderline personality disorder. Now, having a fearful avoidant attachment doesn't mean that you have BPD, but if you have BPD, you most likely do have a fearful avoidant attachment style. People who have a fearful attachment style can be hyper-vigilant on picking up cues from others. They almost seem to be able to mind read because growing up, they had to pick up on the subtle mood shifts of their caregivers and constantly walk on eggshells around them. They also tend to be the most sexually promiscuous, but sometimes polarized to the other extreme and avoid it altogether. Even though they'll switch back and forth between the anxious and dismissive attachment styles, in a relationship, they'll typically act more like the opposite attachment style of their partner. So now that you've possibly pegged yourself as one of the insecure attachment styles, first you should know that you're not broken or damaged just because you have an insecure attachment style. It doesn't make you bad or unworthy of love. It's a very, very common thing. But it's just not the healthiest version of you that you can be. And so you can always work on becoming more secure if you want to. There's no firm cutoff between secure and insecure attachment styles or between fearful and the 2 other ones. They sort of gradiate into each other, and so you can be anywhere on this graph, and it can shift over time. I like to sometimes think of the attachment styles as a line rather than a 4-quadrant graph, with anxious and dismissive on the 2 ends, secure right in the middle, and fearful bouncing back and forth between the 2 ends. Any combination of attachment styles can date each other, except 2 very dismissive avoidant partners probably won't ever take off into a relationship because there's just not enough intimacy to make it take off. And it's very common for people who lean anxious to date people who lean dismissive. It can sometimes feel like a soulmate connection, even though really it's just them triggering each other's childhood wounds. But in a way, I kind of feel like that does make them soulmates because that enables them to heal. There's a statistic floating around that over half of people are securely attached, and I highly disagree. I looked into those studies, and they're not clear about what cutoff they used of how they define secure and insecure, but whatever cutoff they did use is way too lenient. 50% of people are not securely attached, and we can all work on becoming more secure. So what causes insecure attachment styles? The way we adopt these attachment styles is mostly formed from how our parents raised us when we were young children. The majority of it is programmed into our subconscious mind between the ages of 0 to 7, but our attachment can change over our lives. And significant relationships can alter attachment styles as well, for the better or for the worse. Traumatic events are what cause the insecure attachment styles, but trauma doesn't always have to be big things like abuse or neglect. Even small things that cause an emotional reaction in a child can cause an insecure attachment style. Things like being made fun of, being lost at the store, scraping your knee and being ignored, your parents fighting, alcoholic parents, your parents getting divorced, or your parents staying together despite not being in love. Anytime your parents raise their voice at you rather than speaking at a level tone, which honestly is a pandemic in our society, there's no need to raise your voice pretty much ever. If you had to take care of your siblings, your parents worked a lot, they didn't make eye contact, they didn't show up when you cried, they were hot and cold, they didn't validate your emotions, or you just didn't feel close to them. These traumas cause core wounds to be stored in our subconscious. You can check out my video on what is the subconscious mind if you want to learn all about that. Enough of these little things built up over time will cause an insecure attachment style. These are limiting beliefs that you may not even be aware of that were programmed into your mind either in childhood or through previous relationships. So in order to heal, you need to become consciously aware of these limiting beliefs. These wounds have associated emotions with them that will become triggered throughout your relationships. Each insecure attachment style can have similar core wounds, but may have different ways that they express them. So beginning with the anxious preoccupied attachment style, this can be caused by your parents inconsistently showing up. Sometimes they're there for you, sometimes they're not. Maybe one parent is warm and the other one's cold. Maybe they're both warm, but they just worked too much and weren't around as often as you needed them to be. Typically growing up, clinging on to them helped you get your needs met, and so it taught you to be more clingy in your relationships. So the first core wound that they deal with is, I will be abandoned and that will make me unsafe. If your emotions aren't tended to, you can feel like you're being abandoned because your emotions are a part of you. And so this will feel like panic, fear, and numbness. Second is, I am not good enough and I will be rejected. Because they learned to soothe through their caregivers growing up and never learned how to self-soothe, they became dependent on their caregivers to handle their emotions for them. So anytime they weren't available, it felt like they were being rejected. This can feel like sadness, loneliness, and despair. Third is, I am alone. This is similar to the abandonment wound, but it's more of a heavy feeling, whereas the abandoned wound is more of a fearful feeling. So it can feel like loneliness, hopelessness, and sadness. Fourth is, I am disliked, excluded, and I don't belong. Because they derive their sense of self from the outside coming in, anytime someone they care about, like their partner, goes out with their friends without inviting them, it feels like they're being rejected. They automatically think the worst, think that they're not loved anymore. And so this can feel like jealousy, sadness, fear. And sometimes it can feel like a stinging, burning pain in their chest. Fifth is, I don't matter, I'm unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. This can be caused by having to compete for attention from your caregivers, from having strict parents who don't seem to see your needs or don't explain why they're saying no to you. This can make you feel sad, small, and alone. So moving on to the dismissive avoidant core wounds. For most, it's caused by emotional neglect in childhood, by cold caregivers who didn't validate their emotions or would try to shut down their child's feelings. They would say, oh, grow up and be a man, quit crying. It can also be caused by actual physical abandonment. This can cause them to detach and try to get their needs only met through themselves so that they don't have to rely on others and then eventually be let down. These core wounds go deeper than the anxious or fearful attachment styles, and so it may be harder to become cognizantly aware that you have these limiting beliefs. And the dismissive avoidant tends to have more blunted emotions, and so they might not feel the associated emotions with these core wounds as much, but if you look into the actions of how these manifest, you'll see that they stem from these core wounds. First is, I will be abandoned and I am alone. In a relationship, they'll assume that this will happen more in the long term, as opposed to the anxious, where they feel like it'll happen more in the short term. And so they cope with this wound by keeping themselves alone because they find safety and comfort in it. Second is, I am unsafe. Because the emotional neglect from their caregivers made them feel unloved, they didn't feel like they could trust their parents, because if they're not emotionally there for them, it made them feel like they weren't truly cared for, and so it felt like they would be left and they would be unsafe. This wound keeps the dismissive avoidant in kind of a low level of flight or fight their entire lives. Feel like they can't rest, they're on constant alert, and they may be overly attached to things like money or food or things that make their well-being secure. And the emotions that kind of come along with it are panic, fear, and agitation. Third is, I am defective. And this is a big wound for the dismissive. Because they didn't feel that close emotional bond with their caregivers, they felt like something was wrong with them. Because children personalize everything. In a relationship, they may feel like if you get too close to me, you'll see that I'm defective and leave, and so they'll withdraw. And this can feel like sadness and shame. Fourth is I am trapped, stuck, or powerless. And this wound makes the dismissive not reach out as often or try to make plans. Sometimes it can feel like something is physically stopping them from taking that action. And it can feel like frustration, irritation, or constant screaming in their head. Fifth is I am stupid. It may feel like if they make a mistake, they'll be judged too harshly for it. And they can feel more connected to the world through logic, through learning about it, rather than through feeling. And so they overcompensate by educating themselves to the extreme. And this can make them feel judgmental and hypercritical of themselves and sometimes others. I definitely don't have this problem. It's definitely not why I'm making this video. And sixth is I am misunderstood, I don't matter, I'm unseen and unheard. But because the dismissive doesn't communicate vulnerably about how they're feeling, it can perpetuate this wound. They can be hesitant to bring up their emotions because in childhood, their emotions were repressed with a feeling of rejection. So anytime they try to bring up their emotions, that feeling can come up again. It can also feel like sadness, fear, disconnection, and aloneness. Subconsciously, they feel like if they get too close to anyone, they will relive the experiences of painful neglect from their childhood. They build up these giant walls and it becomes incredibly hard to get close to them because they deny that they ever had those needs to begin with and won't ever become vulnerable with you. They tend to gravitate more towards friendships because they're easier and feel safer. And they're often unmotivated to change or to heal their attachment style because it feels unsafe. They built their entire personality around being hyper-independent. And so they're the least likely to want to heal because it triggers their wound of I am defective. So on to the fearful avoidant attachment style. They share the core wounds of both the dismissive and the anxious attachment style, but they have some unique ways of expressing them. This attachment style was caused by hot and cold caregivers growing up. They had very large unpredictability in the home, and in the most extreme cases, had very chaotic or very abusive homes growing up. And so they can have a lot of fear towards their caregiver. The first core wound is I will be betrayed. This is due to the inconsistency growing up. They couldn't trust their caregiver, and so that made it feel like they were going to be abandoned. And so this goes together with the abandonment wound. It can feel like a stinging hurt, anger, resentment, and frustration. Second is I am bad or defective. They felt like they couldn't make any mistakes or it would set their caregiver off and there would be chaos in the home because making a mistake caused too big of an emotional reaction with their caregivers. And so this can make them criticize themselves a lot, and it can feel like shame, rumination, and panic. Third is I am not good enough and I'm unworthy. This can make the fearful try to overcompensate and take on responsibilities that they don't need to, overburden themselves. This is similar to the I am bad wound, but this one has more guilt, whereas that one was more of shame. Fourth is I will be attacked and I am unsafe. And this one's deeply unconscious. You may not ever recognize that you have this core wound, but you'll see if you're emotionally attacked, you'll hyper-defend yourself because in childhood, it felt like there was no one there to defend you. And so this can create very volatile anger. You'll react very largely to small things. And fifth is I am a burden. You feel like your existence is a burden on others and you shouldn't have been born. This can feel like guilt and depression. So all of these core wounds of each attachment style can become worse over time unless you choose to heal them. Think of like a stereotypical grumpy old person. That's a result of the core wounds just perpetually getting worse and worse over time rather than choosing to heal them. And I don't think you want to be a grumpy old person, so you might as well heal them. So I have a video coming out next week on how to heal your attachment styles and how to become more secure. Subscribe so you won't miss it, and I'll put a link in the description once it's out. But if you're impatient, I made a free workbook with all of the information from both videos, including journaling exercises so you know exactly what you need to do step by step in order to heal. And it's fully blind accessible for anyone who needs to use a screen reader. The link to download it is in the description. This is a very brief overview of each attachment style, so if you want a lot more detailed information, I highly recommend Thais Gibson's YouTube channel. She has hundreds of videos on each attachment style. Please don't touch the camera. Oh my god. She has hundreds of videos on each attachment style, how they show up in different phases of relationships, after breakups, different situations, intimacy. She's not paying me to say this. She has no clue that I'm shouting her out. I just love her YouTube channel so much and think that she deserves so many more subscribers. So, if you felt personally attacked by this video, give it a thumbs up. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for taking the time to educate yourself about why you are the way you are, so you can consciously choose to live a healthier and happier life. I'm sending you all my love. Bye.